From cooling towers to boiler feed water, wastewater to drinking water, Pyxis Lab has technology to fit all of your water treatment applications. Our innovative solutions cater to industries ranging from fisheries to breweries and everything in between. With Pyxis Lab, you're not just getting products, you're gaining a partner committed to revolutionizing water treatment. Don't let outdated technology hold you back. Go to scalinguph2o.com/Pyxis. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/PYXIS. Pyxis, because water professionals deserve better. Hey there, Scaling Up Nation. It's Trace Blackmore, and I want to talk about how you can simplify your water treatment operations. Aquaphoenix Scientific is your go-to source for everything you need, from test kits to cutting-edge equipment and technology. Imagine having all of your water treatment needs met in one place. With Aquaphoenix Scientific, you get integrated solutions that enhance operational efficiency across your entire water ecosystem. At Aquaphoenix Scientific, they're not just committed to customer service, they're obsessed with it, going above and beyond to make sure every order, every question, and every interaction exceeds expectations. Whether you're looking for precision testing or advanced technology, Aquaphoenix Scientific is the go-to source for custom test kits, equipment, and water management software designed to make your water treatment smarter and more efficient. So if you're ready to streamline your water management, head over to scalinguph2o.com/APS. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/APS. Aquaphoenix Scientific, your one-stop solution for smart water and chemical management. Welcome to the Scaling Up H2O podcast, the podcast where we scale up on knowledge so we don't scale up our systems. I'm Trace Blackmore, the host of the Scaling Up H2O podcast. And nation, how did it happen? We are in May already. It seems like just yesterday we were celebrating New Year's, and I was telling you what we had in store for you in 2025 on this Scaling Up H2O podcast. And now we are in May. Time flies, which is why I think last week's episode was so important about, are we leading a life of significance and how are we living a life of gratitude? It is May already, and it does not seem like it should be May. Life is short, and we just need to make sure that we are recognizing every second of it for what it's worth. So, by the way, if you did not listen to last week's episode, that was with one of my mentors, Aaron Walker. We call him Big A. And that's what he talked about. He talked about how are we making sure that we are taking account for all of the things we should be focusing on, and maybe drowning out some of the noise that we are trained to focus on by staying in social media and mainstream media. Well, heck, it's probably all media. So with that, we are intentionally going to listen to last week's episode. I'm sure if you already listened to it, or if you do listen to it, you are glad and will be glad that you did. And of course, each and every week we bring you a new episode, and we are honored that this podcast accepted the Innovation Award given by the Association of Water Technologies last year. And that was for having the message that we do, building the community that we do, trying to raise the bar in the industrial water treatment industry. And of course, by listening to this podcast, you do that. But especially by sharing this podcast is a way that you do that, because every time we find a new listener, we get to intrigue people with things they already know and maybe challenge how they know it and how they do it. introducing them to new guests, and of course, pushing the edge on their knowledge so they can constantly be better and know more. We want to do that with every single industrial water treater out there. And the only way we can do that is with your help and you sharing the message that we have a podcast called Scaling Up H2O that is just for the industrial water treatment industry. And we would love it if we could expand how many people are listening to this podcast. It is very humbling that tens of thousands of people listen to this podcast each and every week. And that is just amazing. And we get to hear from so many individuals that say that they did that very thing. They bolstered the knowledge that they already knew. They learned things they didn't know that they didn't know. And they challenged themselves to do something different and new. And so many people have gotten their certification. So many people have decided that they were going to go to a conference. There are just so many things that people are doing out there because they are trying to raise the bar on themselves and the industry. So nation, we're all in this together. Let's help each other make this the best industry in the world. Who are we kidding? It already is. But let's make sure it stays there. And we're going to do our part. And somebody that does more than their part, not just each and every week, but in so much in the industrial water treatment industry, well, that's our friend James McDonald. And here is a brand new What Do You Know by James.
Hello and welcome to What Do You Know? The game show where we find out what do you know about industrial water treatment, drop by drop. So pump up your brain, take out that test kit of knowledge, and prepare to answer this week's question on What Do You Know? Today's question is, what do you call the large diameter tube in fire tube boilers, where the combustion of fuel takes place? It is called a Morrison tube. It may even be corrugated to enhance strength, heat transfer area, and promote turbulence in the combustion gases. I'm James McDonald, and thanks for playing along with us. Stay tuned for next week's episode of What Do You Know?
Scaling Up Nation, next week, many of our listeners are going to be going to the Innovation and Certification Conference that is taking place in Denver, Colorado. And if you want more information on that, we're going to have all of that on our show notes page. This is the 38th time that they have had this conference, and it features workshops on emerging technologies in the water treatment industry. So hopefully you get a chance to go to that. And while you're there, please tell the people at the conference that there is a great podcast out there called Scaling Up H2O, and maybe they should subscribe to it. By the way, a fun fact, we get a tremendous amount of listeners on our webpage. And a lot of people don't know that they can use their favorite podcast player and subscribe so our podcasts actually come to you. Now, we don't mind that you're going on our webpage because we have so much information on the webpage. Nation, our team here has just done such a great job of putting things together for you so you can find that have happened on this podcast. There are so many references and tools over the years that we have collected from our guests. They are all on scalinguph2o.com, just like our events page. And the events page is the place to go when you want to know what is going on in the industrial water treatment industry. Like the 11th Microbial Ecology and Water Engineering Conference, which is entitled Managing Water Microbiomes. Now, that's taking place here in my hometown of Atlanta, Georgia, June 3rd through 5th. I'm hoping somebody invites me there. Maybe I can cover that on the podcast. So if you know somebody at the International Water Association that is going to be putting together, I think it's called MIWI, the Microbial Ecology and Water Engineering Conference. So if you or somebody you know has anything to do with that, please reach out to me. I'd love to come down there and take a look and maybe feature some of that on the podcast. But if you want to learn more about it, we're going to have that on our events page. We're also going to have the 2025 BOMA International Conference and Expo. We're going to have all of that information up there. That's taking place in Boston, Massachusetts, June 28th through July 1st. Now, BOMA stands for Building Owners and Managers Association. And I personally have been involved with BOMA for years. I was in Georgia BOMA, I still am. And I was on their board of directors. I headed up several of their committees. They are a fantastic organization. And if you have not done anything with BOMA, you might want to look into it. Of course, we're going to have information about the conference by going to scalinguph2o.com, going over to our events section. Now, the Water Environment Association of Texas, in conjunction with the Water Environment Federation, is putting on their Collection Systems and Stormwater Conference July 15th through 18th in Houston, Texas. Of course, we're going to have that for you on our events page. And then the last one that I will mention is the third annual Water Efficiency and Conservation Symposium taking place in Chicago. Now, this is hosted by the Alliance for Water Efficiency, and this is all about opportunities for professional growth, meaningful networking, knowledge exchange. Now, there's a very dynamic agenda that includes presentation, panels, roundtables, research, resources, hands-on learning, all sorts of items to help you learn whatever it is that you want to learn. So all of these items that I mentioned and more by you going to scalinguph2o.com/events. Nation, our next guest has been on this podcast multiple times, and I am ecstatic that we have him back. Nation, here's the interview. My lab partner today is Mike Standish of MFG Chemical. Returning guest, Mike Standish. Mike, this is your fifth time on the podcast.
Hard to believe, actually. I'm getting very old. You're not old, but I'm very old, I think.
I think it's more than 5 times because as I do those convention walk-bys, you've always been somebody that has been on those. So my count might be off.
Yeah, it's hard to believe. How long have you been doing the podcast now?
Let's see, April of 17. So we're coming up on 8 years.
Wow. Now I kind of feel like it should have been more than 5.
I'm sure it's more than 5, but official episodes where you and I have sat down just like this, it's been 5 episodes. And the very first one was in September of 2017. That was our first year. That was episode 14.
That's hard to believe.
I think that was back when I was doing it every 2 weeks.
Well, first of all, congratulations on the success of scaling up because it's pretty phenomenal. I remember when you were just getting started with it and, everything takes a lot of effort to get going and it's really amazing. I think you told me you had done 400 episodes, so...
Yeah, at the end of the year, we completed 400 episodes, so we're well in the 4s now. Between you and I and all the audience, I numbered weird in the beginning, so one of your episodes could have been 13.6. I don't know why I did stuff like that, but yeah, you don't have to mess with numbering, Mike. Numbering's done.
That's good. Well, I'm happy to be 14, 176, 223, 350, and 4 something.
For something. So I don't think it's a secret. We pre-record these interviews and then we assign it to our podcast calendar later on down the line.
No, it's great. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity and invitation.
Yeah, you were one of the first people I talked to when I was thinking about doing the podcast. I think we were at an AWT event of some sort. And then I think 2 years later, you had asked me about advertising, and you were the very first advertiser with Radical Polymers we had ever had on the podcast. And I was so scared that people were going to think, oh, he's doing ad sales. It's not an industry podcast anymore. And I couldn't have been more wrong about that. And you really helped counsel me through that and stepped up to be the first one. So thank you for all of that.
Yeah, no, that's great. I'm a huge believer in, the difference between kind of knowledge and information. So you might wonder where I'm going with this, but to me, the huge value of this podcast is that it's a lot of passing on industry knowledge from a lot of diverse people that you interview. And so it seems like in a way our society's got where you can Google something and that all of a sudden that information is taken as knowledge, but it's really not. But I think this is a nice venue, to communicate something more than just information, so I'm happy to be a part of it.
When I went to my first AWT convention as a business owner, it was in Palm Springs, and I had to fly from Atlanta to Phoenix and then from Phoenix to Palm Springs. Well, it was a big plane from Atlanta to Phoenix, very small plane from Phoenix to Palm Springs. And I sat next to Bob Cavano on that leg of the flight. Now, I didn't know who Bob was. In fact, I was upset because it was the type of plane where there was one seat on one side of the plane and two seats on the other. And I was upset that I was going to have to sit next to somebody. So I'm trying to find my seat and I'm in the aisle next to Bob, who had the window. I didn't know him at the time. And he said, "Young man, where are you heading?" I was like, "Pretty sure the same place you're going." He's like, No. Once you get there, where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going to this place called the Association of Water Technologies." He goes, "Me too. Sit down. We've got a lot to talk about." Oh my gosh, that plane ride was fantastic. You never wish for a flight delay. I was hoping we were going to stay in the air longer on that one. Just such great information. I didn't know anything about podcasts at the time, but that would have been such a good podcast. And unfortunately, Bob's not around anymore, and all the knowledge that was lost when we lost Bob.
Yeah, you could sit and talk to Bob for hours. I used to see him at an international water conference, and he would come by our suite, and we would sit in there and just talk for, a good long time because he was one of those guys that's very happy to share, his experiences, his knowledge, and he was also very inquisitive. He wanted to learn. So Bob was outstanding. And you're right. If there'd been podcasts at the time, could have really captured a lot from Bob.
Well, when somebody then said, you should do a podcast, that was the memory that came in my head. Oh, I could have had a vehicle to capture something like that. And not just I got the benefit, everybody gets the benefit.
Yeah, for sure.
And speaking of the benefit, you've been on, this is number 5. Your biggest fan is AWT staff member Angela Pike. She says, I don't have you on enough. And if you just read a phone book, she said she would listen to.
Angela needs some professional help. I
can't comment either way on that.
I can.
But I will say, you are not reading a phone book today. We're going to be talking about a paper that you presented at the most recent AWT conference. Before we get there, what have you been up to since the last time we've had you on the show?
Well, I'm kind of happy to go a little personal here. So I just came back, and I'm excited about. I just came back from a trip to Honduras with 12 other guys, and we went down and did some work on houses and building water basins, essentially for fresh water supply to some of the local residents in one of the communities there. And this is my 4th trip, and so it was a great experience. I will say, I left there. We're in a place called Choluteca, which is kind of southern Honduras, and it was 97 degrees Fahrenheit. And I landed in Atlanta and got to Chattanooga, and it was 25 Fahrenheit. And so I'm still trying to figure that all out. But yeah, so that's one of the personal things I've been doing that I really enjoy and expect to go back pretty soon, actually.
Which group do you go out with?
We go with our local church, who's been serving there in that particular community for over a decade. And so it's kind of a well-established thing that usually there's about 4 trips a year, different ones, a medical trip, a construction trip, something where we'll visit orphanages and, other families and so forth. So this one was the kind of what we call the handyman's trip. So we'll go down and put on roofs or, whatever's needed.
I would be surprised if most listeners have not heard of some sort of mission trip opportunity, but most of us say, I really want to do that. I'm just too busy. I don't know how to find the time. What are some of the benefits you get out of doing that?
Yeah, so I'm 57 years old. And so my first, mission trip was about 2 years ago. So I waited a long time to do that. Had a lot of apprehension and, a lot of different things going on. But yeah, I think obviously, and everybody would tell you this, you're going to get more than you give. I think that's in any scenario, whether it's a mission trip. Anytime you're, doing something for somebody else, you get more than what you put into it. I learn a lot. For me, there's particularly on this handyman's trip, it's a lot of fellowship with, guys that are just different walks of life, and everybody's there for a common purpose. And we have a lot of fun. We work hard and are exhausted, but have a tremendous amount of fun too. One of the guys said that this is his Disneyland. And I kind of see that it's a lot of hard work, but it's a tremendous amount of fun.
Well, hopefully you've inspired a few people to try to find the time.
Yeah, I'm super excited about going back. It's all and you have a good excuse. I will say this: so for somebody that's looking for an excuse to do it, it's easy to go somewhere like that and say, "Hey, I'm not going to be available for email, for phone calls and stuff." It's a good way to check out of normal life for a week as well. So although typically cell phone service is pretty good anywhere, but you have a pretty good excuse to say, I'm not answering emails this week and phone calls this week.
Mike, how has the quality of your work changed when you get to unplug and just totally decompress for a week and then you come back and you see things how?
Yeah, I don't know. That's probably honestly the wrong time to ask me this question because I just got back and I probably have like two or 300 emails I haven't answered and that I'm really struggling to stay afloat right now. But yeah, I think it does put you behind in that regard. But in the other regard, it kind of gives you perspective that you don't necessarily, see every day when you're coming into work. And it's not necessarily about lifestyle differences or whatever. That's the easy answer. I think just being able to kind of step away from the grind for a few days and kind of it does kind of re-energize you and give you better focus. For me, look, I feel even within my work, the thing that I enjoy the most is helping customers solve technical problems and so forth. So that's kind of what keeps me going. So I just enjoy doing that type of thing.
Well, thanks again for making our Scaling Up Nation think about possibly saying yes the next time they are offered a trip like that.
Yeah.
Well, let's switch gears. And I was an audience member when you gave this presentation at the Association of Water Technologies in Louisville. And it was on maleic acid based inhibitors. And you always do a great job with presentations, but you started out saying that, we all have a toolbox that we work with when it comes to corrosion control. Can we start there?
Sure. I think the reason why I wanted to describe it that way is to simplify things a little bit because I think it's pretty easy for particularly people like myself that are getting involved in development of additives. I think it's pretty easy for us to overcomplicate things. So I kind of wanted to present it more as a toolbox in that, hey, there's a fairly limited number of options of approaches for corrosion control. And if we kind of look at each one a little bit independently and make sure that, we're using a hammer when we're trying to drive a nail instead of a screwdriver or what have you, I think, that was kind of a more of a simplified approach to how to address some of the issues that we see. Because for mild steel corrosion in particular, there's just not a lot of options. If you think about it, you have phosphate chemistry, you have metals chemistry, whether that's zinc or molybdate in some cases, or tin in other cases. And you have then organic chemistry, whether it's phosphonates, which are widely used, or, things like filming amines and so forth. But in general, there's not a whole lot of choices. So it's really important to make sure that we're picking the right tool for the right job.
Mike, something else that's used for corrosion is calcium carbonate. And I know you've been to some of the training classes that I do, and I try to distinguish that there's a difference from corrosion inhibition and scale. So to have all this scale on side of chiller tubes, you're not protecting anything. So that's not what we're talking about here. Do you mind speaking into that?
From a technical point of view, if you lay down a thin film of calcium carbonate onto mild steel, it will have cathodic corrosion protection properties. So, calcium carbonate is a cathodic corrosion inhibitor. However, in practice, it's pretty difficult to keep a mono or a few molecule film there. You tend to transition from non scaling to scale formation pretty quickly. But what you can do, what I like to say is kind of use the water to kind of work for us. So if we're in a situation where we're trying to control corrosion, we can make the water a little bit less corrosive by increasing the potential for calcium carbonate scale formation. And you see a lot of that. I mean, you'll see people operate systems at higher calcite saturations, higher pHs, mitigate the potential for corrosion, mild steel corrosion, and then address that with scale inhibiting phosphonates and polymers.
You mentioned anodic and cathodic protection. We have water treaters listening from all sorts of experience levels. If that's the first time that they've heard that term, what are they?
Yeah, so it addresses where the additive is affecting corrosion suppression. So when you have a corrosion cell, you have an anodic active site and you have a cathodic active site. Anodic is obviously negative and cathodic positive. And so if you refer to something as a cathodic inhibitor, it's inhibiting the cathodic side of that reaction. If it's an anodic inhibitor, it's inhibiting the anodic side of that reaction. A great example to kind of think about in this regard would be orthophosphate versus polyphosphate. Orthophosphate is an anodic inhibitor. It inhibits the anodic side of the reaction, where polyphosphate is a cathodic inhibitor and inhibits the cathodic side of the reaction.
We were in an account not too terribly long ago, and there was somebody else's product there. So we looked at their label, and it said all organic formula, like we were in the grocery store. So, what exactly does that mean? And does it mean the same thing as when we're in the grocery store?
Absolutely does not mean the same thing as if you're in the grocery store. That actually kind of comes up quite a bit because organic, as it's described in the grocery store, means that there's really no synthetic additives added to that process. Whereas organic in our world, in the water treatment world, just means that it's organic molecules. So most of those, in fact, would be synthetic and not naturally derived. So when somebody says an all organic formula in water treatment has no connotation whatsoever of natural or renewable or green, it's more that just it's all organic molecules and no inorganics like metals.
So, why would somebody choose an organic phosphate over an inorganic phosphate?
Well, I think it's situational. It goes back to the toolbox thing. I'll start off actually with the opposite. I think inorganic phosphates and polyphosphates are going to be the most cost effective and possibly the most effective corrosion inhibitors when used in combination and used properly of virtually all the tools that we have available to us. So orthophosphate and common polyphosphates can be used to cover both the anodic and cathodic sides of the reaction, which makes them very powerful. They're low cost materials and they can deliver mild steel corrosion rates to under 2 mils per year very consistently in a wide range of applications and water chemistry. So that's why we use so much inorganic phosphate in our water applications. Why would you use organic phosphonates? I think there's a couple of reasons. One is anytime you're using orthophosphate or polyphosphate that's going to revert to orthophosphate, you have to address that with control of calcium phosphate. So you have to add polymers or other types of additives, mainly polymers, to control calcium phosphate in those scenarios, so you're not, laying down scale. That's not the case with the organic phosphonate type chemistry. I think that's one, reason to do so. Another reason is efficacy. I mean, these products can be quite effective, particularly under higher pH conditions where you have most of the phosphonates will also have calcium carbonate inhibition properties. So they're really good selections, particularly in higher LSI, higher calcite saturation applications.
Your paper was about maleic acid products. Are they a one-to-one replacement to what we're talking about right now?
Yeah, our products are phosphonates as well, but they're derived from maleic as a starting raw material. And the things that water treaters know about maleics are that they do provide some sequestration of hardness. They provide inhibition of calcium carbonate, so they're good selections there. And the other thing about maleic based materials is they tend to be very oxidant stable. I was talking with someone else earlier today about biocides, and it's kind of interesting through my career, and I'll tie this back into the maleic portion, but it was very interesting in my career when I started out. Really, what a lot of people were using in particularly light industrial and HVAC systems were non-oxidizers. That was just the trend. And then pathogen control became a big issue. And so the prevailing kind of approach there became continuous residual halogenation. And that's kind of where we remain today, And so what that means is that any organic corrosion inhibitor or any organic chemical that we're adding for control of either scale or corrosion must be, stable to oxidation. And I think that's one of the biggest benefit of the maleic based approach is because it does deliver that oxidant stability.
All right, Scaling Up Nation, it's time for a word from one of our sponsors. Today, I want to talk about a powerful ally in the fight against biofilm, AMSA. Here's the bottom line. Biocides alone just aren't enough to control biofilm. That's why AMSA's R&D team designed BCP products to work alongside biocides to create an effective biofilm control program. Whether you're dealing with oxidizing or non-oxidizing biocides, AMSA products are compatible and enhance their performance, helping to keep your system under control. But that's not all. AMSA BCP products are versatile. They can be used for aggressive offline cleaning, gradual online cleaning, or as part of a regular water treatment program to keep your cooling water systems clean long term. Whether you're dosing in a slug-based or continuous program, AMSA has you covered. AMSA products are your secret weapon in systems prone to fouling, like those with high ammonia levels, hydrocarbon contamination, or reclaimed water. Because as we all know, AMSA's chemistry helps clean it up and keep it clean. Scaling Up Nation, if you're ready to take your biofilm control program to the next level, head over to scalinguph2o.com/AMSA to learn more about their innovative biofilm control program solutions. Once again, that's scalinguph2o.com/AMSA. Trust me, your cooling water systems will thank you. Scaling Up Nation, we have some of the most amazing sponsors. Now, back to the interview. So let's say I'm looking at a product formulation and I've got HPA in it, HPA hydroxyphosphonoacetic acid. Is that right?
Yeah.
And I want to replace it with PMA, polymaleic acid. How do I do that? Is that possible? Is that what we're talking about here?
Not exactly.
Okay.
But yes, the HPA chemistry is a phosphonate, but it's actually not particularly oxidant stable. And in fact, if you look at the early literature when that material was introduced into the market, there are a lot of kind of cautionary statements about feeding it intermittently if you're slug dosing with oxidizer, or if you're using a continuous residual, you're going to generate orthophosphate from that molecule. So HPA can become a pretty expensive source of orthophosphate in a situation where you have residual halogen hanging around in a cooling tower. But the maleic-based materials tend to overcome that issue from halogenation. So you wouldn't replace the HPA with polymaleic, you would replace it with the phosphonate that is maleic derived. Now, all that being said, in fairness to HPA has been used for decades quite successfully. And, you can debate whether or not that is where you've got a combination of HPA that's functioning as a corrosion inhibitor and or orthophosphate that's a decomposition product or an oxidation product from it. That's probably something that people could talk through. But what's not particularly debatable is HPA has been delivering, good corrosion rates for mild steel for people for, decades.
So, what is a new maleic based corrosion inhibitor?
So I don't know how technical we want to get. Maybe we step back one step. The difference between inorganic phosphate and a phosphonate is the phosphonate has a carbon phosphorus bond. So essentially, you're adding that phosphorus compound to an organic molecule that has a carbon in it by default. I guess all organic molecules have carbon. So in this case, what we're doing is we're taking maleic, which is a dicarboxylic acid material with carbon atoms along it, and we're reacting that in such a way to add the phosphonate moiety or functionality to the backbone of that material. And so you end up with carbon phosphorus bond that forms a phosphonate. So one end of the molecule is a phosphonate, the other end of the molecule has maleic, which is the dicarboxylic acid. Without kind of going into a lot of the different company approaches and flexibility with the products, what I will say about this is maleic is also what's considered a monomer. So you can string together repeating units of maleic to make polymers. And so what's important kind of in this context about all that is essentially the reaction of these products is we're taking the maleic, which is the monomer, we're taking an initiator to make polymers or oligomers or start to string some of these together, and then we're taking phosphorus acid, which adds the PO3 to the material. So what's kind of cool about the maleic based inhibitors is you can start with these raw materials, but you can change the functionality of the material if you want, based on the reaction conditions and based on the ratio of the maleic versus the phosphorus in the product. So if we wanted to make one that was maybe less scale inhibiting but more corrosion inhibiting, we could increase the level of phosphorus in the ratio. Or if we wanted to make something that was more scale inhibiting but still had some benefit of mild steel corrosion, we could add more of the maleic component and string more of that together. We can affect molecular weight by how much initiator we add. So there's a lot of flexibility to the chemistry to kind of tailor it to specific applications.
Should every water treater be looking into this?
I don't know. I'm a very big proponent of using the right tool in the right time, right? So I don't think that this is a material that's used in every single application. I started off kind of answering your question by saying, look, the most effective and the lowest cost, the most broadly used with the most flexibility approach within phosphorus chemistry is using orthophosphate and polyphosphate together. I think, that's still the answer for a vast majority of the applications. I do think, though, that the maleic based materials and other phosphonates are great choices situationally. In my view, the place where you want to use them is in higher pH applications with lower baseline corrosion rates, applications where you may have high hardness loading, potentially high saturation for calcium carbonate. So more scaling conditions where you need these products to function to control mild steel corrosion at a minimal level.
Would you also add if you're in a oxidized environment?
Yeah, absolutely. Here's what I would say about where you don't necessarily want to use these materials. Cost is going to be an issue because you're making a synthetic organic material that's more expensive than inorganic phosphate. So cost is, one consideration. The other consideration is highly corrosive environments. I'm not a big believer in these materials at this point. If you're running a pH control program down below 8.3 or 8 or what have you, you have high baseline corrosion for mild steel. I don't think this is necessarily the best, choice to try to throw out that application. Can you make it work? Yeah, but I think you're going to have to add dosages that are not attractive from an economic point of view.
Everything's getting a tag on it so we can measure. Is this one of those items?
It doesn't have a fluorescent tag on it. In fact, you probably don't want to put a fluorescent tag on something that's so small. This is a small molecule that the fluorescent tag probably have a molecular weight that'd be similar to the molecule itself and be dead weight. So you don't necessarily want to do that, but you can readily measure these with the phosphonate test, and they will work with those quite readily.
What are some lessons you've learned during your field trials?
We've had really nice success with field trials where we have had access to data. As an additive supplier, we don't necessarily always get that, but we've got a couple of accounts that have been pretty large where they've used the material with good success. And in fact, that kind of goes to my comment about measuring, because one of our customers really wanted to be able to measure concentration of the material. And so what I learned from that is kind of being able to help them sort out the difference between orthophosphate in their water and the phosphonate in the water through the types of testing. From a results point of view, I think dosage is very important. The tendency of a lot of people is to underfeed these materials. And I don't think you can necessarily do that. I think at a minimum, you need 5 to 10 ppm active of these types of materials. And so you can definitely see a correlation between dosage and corrosion rates. So where we've seen some applications less than 5 ppm active, we've seen corrosion rates that have not been off the charts, but been 4 or 5 mils per year. And so, it's critical to titrate, if you will, the corrosion inhibitor to the rate that you're expecting.
Mike, you'll model things before you put them into practice. How accurate is the model to real life?
Yeah, I would adjust what you said just a little, because in this case, I don't do a lot of corrosion modeling per se, like you would see in French Creek, say, for scale modeling. But what we certainly would do is a lot of lab testing and benchtop and pilot testing. And how does that correlate, to the field would be my little bit of adjustment. That would be our kind of modeling approach in this case. It can go either way. You got to really be careful, because one of the things that people a lot of times don't think about when they're doing lab testing of corrosion inhibitors is making sure that the surface area of the coupons that are being used versus the water volume is consistent with what you might see out in the field. If you get that kind of right, then your dosage demands can be pretty close. If you get that a little bit out of whack, then you could either underestimate or overestimate how much corrosion inhibitor that's necessary.
I'll ask water treaters that'll try a new product, and 9 times out of 10, I'll get some sort of sensational reply. And I want more scientific data. And I'm sure you've experienced the same thing. If somebody is switching from product A and testing product B, what really should they be comparing?
I always try to talk with the customer. One of the things I would love to have the opportunity for, whether it's this product or anything else of ours that someone's using, is really to have the opportunity to kind of talk through what the customer's expectations are with the material, what their experience is with their incumbent approach. And I think that allows the vendor in this case, or the additive supplier, to be able to help guide them in terms of what they should expect to see when they implement the material. So I don't know that that exactly answered your question, but I think, what you want to do, if I'm in your shoes as a water treater and I'm looking at a new additive, I think I want to understand the limits of functionality, where it should be used, where it excels, where it shouldn't be used, how much am I going to have to add, what kind of parameters should I be looking at in terms of to assess the efficacy of the material. And I think, ultimately I'm going to want to see some data, if nothing else, kind of comparative data to things that the industry has a lot of experience with. So we can say, okay, under these conditions, this works like this other thing that you've used for 10 years, or here it's working a little better, here it's working a little worse. But I'm going to want, my vendor to have that type of information and be able to communicate that to me. So I'm not flying blind of just, chunking in a new additive into my system. So I think, most of the suppliers are able to do that to some degree. And I think, in the case of corrosion inhibitors, you can kind of use the word titrate a little bit in the application, in that I think it's relatively easy to say, okay, we're feeding 8 ppm, we're seeing 3 mils per year. Let's take that up to 10 ppm, and now does it come down to 2? Or, we're feeding 8 ppm and we're seeing 1.5 mils per year. Can we bump that down to 5 ppm as a dosage and still be below 2, or wherever we feel like our acceptable range? You can't do that so much on scale control, but on corrosion control, you can kind of use a titration approach.
Mike, if a listener wants to learn more about maleic corrosion inhibitors, what should they do?
I think they can read the AWT paper that we gave last fall. And, there's other competitive products that they could look at as well. There's a fair body of information out there on these types of chemistries in literature and in patents that people can really kind of learn a lot about.
With your permission, we'll put those items on our show notes page.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely.
Well, Mike, this is time number 5. I don't think there's very many people that have made it to the 5th round of the lightning round. So these are some pretty tough questions. Are you ready for them?
I can try.
All right. If you could write a letter to yourself 10 years from now, what would it say?
I think it would be to step back and appreciate every day. Because I'm probably guilty of not doing that. I get caught up in, just being very busy and having a lot going on. And, I would say try to reduce my stress, enjoy the day, enjoy the opportunities, enjoy the community of people that I get to deal with, and not overlook all those opportunities.
What's one decision that completely changed the trajectory of your career?
I started in 1986, and I worked for, I guess, about 25 years in the industry. No, close to 30, because it was starting the business of radical polymers in 2013. So going from always working for large corporations for 25 or 30 years to all of a sudden just going out on my own, that totally changed everything. And it made me wish I'd done it 10 years before, but you don't know what you don't know.
That is the truth. When things get really tough, what motivates you to keep going?
This will sound like it's contrived, but it is 100% true. I will say this: what keeps me coming in here every day is our customers, talking with them, help them. If I didn't feel like I was needed to help customers with their problems, or help them solve problems, or go after opportunities, or what have you, I'd retire. Definitely what keeps me coming in is our customers. Now, our customers in this industry are not really customers. I think that's kind of the differentiation, because, this is my 1986, so this is my 39th year in the industry, and not a lot changes. You mentioned Bob Cavano; he passed away, but people generally, that's the only way out of water treatment. So I've known most of, these are friends, these are people that, I call personally for things and call me personally for things. So they're not just customers, but it's the community that absolutely keeps me going. Otherwise, I would try to retire and do something a little different.
I honestly can't think of a better community than the water treatment community. One more question. Last question is, if you could make a bold prediction about our industry's future, what would it be?
It's going to be something that might make a few people mad. And that is this: we are seeing a tremendous amount of industry consolidation within the AWT at this point. What I think is going to happen, I don't know how long, maybe I'm in heaven with Bob when this happens, but I think what's going to happen is this is creating agglomeration of a little bit larger companies. And much like the first time AWT started, I think there's going to be a second round of AWT in that these companies will get bigger, they'll become more bureaucratic, they'll become more corporate, people get mad, they leave, they start their own companies. So I think it starts kind of the second generation of AWT companies, maybe in a decade or whatever. I think, from a just industry standpoint, there's so much consolidation going on now. I think that that's going to lead to that a little bit.
You're not the first person I've heard that theory from. We'll have to see what happens.
Yeah, we'll have to see. I hope to see it. And I think, look, in a way, it's going to be needed at some point because we need the additional generation of water treaters out there. There's not a lot of people that are 25 or 30 years old to say, hey, I'm going to go out and start a water treatment company. So I think we will need that at some point.
Well, Mike, for the fifth time, I want to thank you for coming on the Scaling Up H2O podcast. We always learn so much when you stop by to visit.
Well, thank you very much for the invitation. Very much honored to be here.
Well, Nation, if you missed it, this was number 5 that Mr. Mike Standish has been on the podcast. The very first one was episode 14, and I've got to be honest, I had no clue what I was doing back on episode 14. I think I thought I did because I thought if I got 10 under my belt that the rest of it would be smooth sailing. And when I look at what I knew back on episode 10 versus all the things I learn on a regular basis hosting this podcast, it's interesting. And I will say that it has been an amazing journey. There is so much new out there today in podcasting and software and interactions with all of you and the guests and all the people that I've met and all the things that we're learning. And all that is through this podcast. But all that to say that Mike was one of our first guests on episode 14. And on that episode, he was telling us all about polymers. And Mike has this way of just simplifying the minutia of how to look at all the polymers. So if you haven't listened to that or you haven't listened to it in a while, and since it's so long ago, I bet it has been a while, you're going to enjoy listening to that episode. Also, episode 176, where he talks about developments in polymer technology. He then came back, episode 223, and talked about water treatment challenges in our industrial applications. And then he came back on 350 and talked about innovations in scale inhibition. And of course, today he was talking about innovations in corrosion inhibition. So we always learn so much when Mike comes to the Scaling Up H2O podcast and shares all of his knowledge. Well, I don't know if we could ever get all of Mike's knowledge out. Wouldn't that be amazing? Anyway, we are going to try. I'm sure Mike's going to come back for another 5 episodes. That is one smart dude, and he's so easy to talk with. So once again, Mike, thanks for sharing that with us. I hope that you have been able to add some tools to your corrosion control toolbox. And maybe now you understand some of the tools that are in your toolbox. Maybe you were using them and you didn't know exactly what they were, or maybe they were pushed off to the side because you didn't quite understand them. So I think today's podcast is one that's going to get shared quite a bit. And as always, we have a discussion guide. If you want to go to our show notes page and download that discussion guide, you can lead a conversation with your team all around this episode. You can do that with pretty much all of our new episodes this year. This was an idea that was given to us by one of our listeners. So many people are trying to up their game and knowledge, and we are trying to do that on each and every podcast. And if we can get people to take this podcast into their companies, then we are doing our job of raising the industry standard, and we're trying to make that as easy as possible. So we have those discussion guides, and of course, we have one for today's episode. Lots of technical things on today's episode, so I'm sure a lot of people are going to use that discussion guide. And if you're doing that, I would love your feedback. I would love your information. We're always trying to make this podcast better. We are going to conferences ourselves to learn best practices for podcasts. We're trying to talk to as many of you out there in the Scaling Up Nation that we can. And Nation, we just want to make sure that this podcast is evolving each and every episode. So if you've got an idea for us, maybe that is a guest to interview, maybe that is a show idea, maybe that's a question for me on a new Pinks and Blues episode. Now, last year we heard from so many people that they really enjoy when I come on, and it's just me talking to you, answering your questions, and we call that Pinks and Blues episode. So as you have learned, we've been doing more and more of those this year. So stay tuned for even more throughout the year. And the only way we can do shows like that is for you to go to scalinguph2o.com, going over to our ideas section and letting us know what your ideas are. Don't keep that stuff to yourself, Nation. Let us know what that is, and we will be sure to act on it. Now, Mike mentioned his paper. We're going to make sure to have that on our show notes. So if you want any of the resources that were mentioned today, simply go to scalinguph2o.com, go over to the show notes for today, and we try to make it as easy as possible for you to listen to this podcast while you're driving from account to account. And then when you are safe at home or at your office, you can go to scalinguph2o.com and you can get any information that we have ever mentioned on our podcast so you can increase your water treatment game. Now, speaking of that, we have all of our Legionella resources. And folks, we have a ton of Legionella resources on our Legionella resource page. And we've been doing Legionella Awareness Month for the past, it's been at least 5 years. We're going to do that again this August. And you're going to love the guests that we have in store for you this August. And of course, all the tools that they give us, they are going to be on that Legionella resource page. Nation, thank you for listening to this podcast each and every week. If you didn't do that, I couldn't do this, and I love hosting this podcast. So thank you for allowing me to do something I absolutely love. Nation, if you're at one of those conferences that we mentioned, let us know what you think. And if you see me there, by all means, come up to me, let me know how you learned about it and that you listened to this podcast and anything else you want me to know. I sure am glad that you do listen to this podcast, and we're going to have a brand new episode for you next Friday. In the meantime, maybe you download that discussion guide and have a conversation with your team. Have a great week, folks. Ready to boost your water treatment expertise? Our Certified Water Technologist Prep course is designed to give you the confidence and skills you need to sign up for the Certified Water Technologist examination. Test your knowledge with our 100-question practice exam and learn what you need to succeed. Go to scalinguph2o.com/CWT prep to get started today.